Mecca provided me with great comfort that day. She awakened something in me that I had never felt before. It was a situation of my own doing, and I was utterly confused. Please hit the like button and subscribe. I'm an old woman living in a quiet countryside, raising a male large breed dog. His name is Mecca, which was also the name of a monkey I used to have. These days, Mecca and I take walks together every day. When we reach the secluded forest trails, I let him off the leash so he can run around freely. He's a breed that needs a lot of exercise, so it's essential for us to take these walks. Mecca is my closest friend and family. In truth, I would like to raise a monkey. Back in the early 80s, you could even find monkeys for sale in the market. It wasn't common, but there were quite a few people who kept monkeys at home. The name Mecca comes from a monkey I raised when I was young. I never told anyone about the things that happened between Mecca and me. People in the neighborhood probably thought I raised Mecca because I was lonely living by myself. But Mecca was more than a friend to me. She was also my husband. I got married in my early 20s to a man much older than me, in his 30s. My husband had a disability, and his family was wealthy. From my in-laws' perspective, they probably worried whether there would be any woman willing to marry their disabled son, hence the urgency. I met my husband through a relative's introduction and decided to marry him, to care for and comfort this poor man who had lived with a disability. At first, my husband and his family treated me very well, but that soon changed and they started to ignore me. I grew up poor and worked in a factory from high school. While living in the factory dormitory and saving money, my father would get into trouble, and I had to clean up after him using the money I had saved. Just when I felt proud of the amount I had saved, it would all go away in an instant, leaving me feeling sad and empty. After covering for my father twice, there was nothing left in my account. After high school, I continued to work hard at the factory and met my husband through a relative. He seemed shy and simple-hearted. Despite his disability, he was a man dedicated to his business. I didn't even know his family was wealthy until before we got married. I simply wanted to marry him out of a desire to care for and comfort this pitiable man. The reason my in-laws and husband disdained me was because I came from a poor family. I was scorned for bringing nothing to the marriage, but looking back, I see no reason why I deserved such treatment. Unable to bear the contempt from my in-laws and husband, I divorced him. Then, I moved here to start a new life in a place where I knew no one. I began living alone, working in a factory close to home. At that time, our local market was quite large. Going to the market offered plenty of things to see and eat. I went there to shop and to watch people. Living alone, I guess I was lonely. That's probably why I enjoyed the bustling, lively market so much. One day, while wandering through the market, I came across a monkey caged up. Most monkeys sold in markets are skittish, but this one sat quietly, seemingly resigned to its fate. At that time, I too was living a life of resignation. My days were spent working at the factory, returning home to eat and sleep. That was it. So, I volunteered to work even on Sundays. Days off were too hard and lonely for me. I felt pity for the monkey I saw at the market, but I quickly finished my shopping and returned home. A few days later, I saw the monkey again. Our eyes met, and it had a look of utter resignation. When I asked the owner, he said the monkey's name was Mecca. I called out to it, "Mecca, Maka looked at me and then turned away. I thought to myself, all right, we're both living lives of resignation, so let's rely on each other. I told the owner I wanted to buy Maka. He was reluctant at first, but I insisted, and he finally agreed. That day, I brought Maka home with me. I couldn't bring Maka home by myself, so the owner delivered Maka to my house. When I brought Maka home and released him from his metal cage, he came out hesitantly. I had heard that monkeys raised in homes are quick-witted and challenging, but Maka didn't give me much trouble. I warmed up some water to bathe him and fed him the food I'd bought from the market. He ate quietly. Living in a quiet rural area, I had a spacious yard, making it a great environment for Maka and me to live together. We spent a lot of time inside the house at first, since it was winter and too cold to take him outside. But as winter gave way to spring, Maka grew unrecognizably large. He wasn't the small monkey sold at the market anymore. I had thought Maka was fully grown when I first saw him there, but it seems he was just a young infant at the time. He kept growing until he was almost my size. With the arrival of spring, I took Maka out to the yard. At first, he seemed wary of the new environment. After a few days getting familiar with the yard, he began to explore, climbing trees, and even walking on two legs around the area. Maka had a passive nature, but he seemed to understand my heart completely. We didn't speak the same language, but he knew all my emotional states. When I was consumed by loneliness and cried, Maka would stroke my head. On days when I was inexplicably happy, he would give me a look that seemed like a smile while I was at work in the factory. Maka played in the yard and inside the house, eagerly awaiting my return. The fact that someone was waiting just for me, someone who could empathize with all my emotions, was so comforting. Maka was my only friend, my family, and in a way, my son. I'm tall and considered quite attractive, a realization that came to me after my divorce. Before that, I hadn't had the opportunity to think about myself much. There were plenty of men at the factory who showed an interest in me, but I had no choice but to turn them down. They were single, and I had to keep my status as a divorcee a secret. If people found out, they would surely look down upon me. In those days in the countryside, it was typical for dogs to be let loose. Walking down the road, it was common to see dogs with tails wagging freely. Years after my divorce, the loneliness became overwhelming. I yearned for the company of a man. However, given that I was living my life as a hidden divorcee, I couldn't pursue any relationships with the men at the factory where I worked. A good while after Maka and I started living together, on a summer day, I came home from a night shift at the factory in the morning. Maka, who knew I normally came back in the evening, must have been waiting eagerly for me. How delighted he must have been when I arrived in the morning. I came in, showered off the day's sweat, and lay down in my room with Maka lying down beside me. As he always did, he stroked my head. Some might judge me harshly, but I am human and was a young woman at the time. Without fully realizing it, I found myself in a position, and Maka responded to my expectations. After the act with Maka, I was filled with a multitude of thoughts. Could this really be happening? How could I, no matter how lonely? But it was certain that Maka had awakened sensations in me that I had never experienced before. My ex-husband had been a man who took care of his own needs in about 3 minutes, and that was it. I was too troubled to sleep after working all night at the factory. When I looked at Mecca, he was there beside me as if nothing had happened. Mecca provided me with joy and ecstasy whenever the opportunity arose. While the end of a workday is a pleasant time for anyone, for me, it was filled with exhilarating anticipation. My walk home was always light and quick. Mecca was not only my friend and family, but in a sense, my husband too. My coworkers would often ask if I had some good news or if I had started dating someone, but I could only smile in response. I couldn't say a word. Life was too enjoyable, and I was too happy with Mecca by my side. During that time, I began a romantic relationship and promised to marry the man. He was very fond of Mecca as well. I spent nights at his place, but my thoughts were consumed with Mecca all night. That's why I tried not to spend the night at his house if possible. He often stayed at my house overnight. When I spent time with this man, Mecca would watch us from the side. I felt sorry for Mecca, but the man would say, "What would Mecca know?" He couldn't have known the depth of the relationship between me and Mecca. This man was not much different from my ex-husband. After being intimate with him when he was asleep, I sometimes had joyful moments with Mecca. After that relationship ended, I dated other men, but it was always Mecca who stayed by my side. No one else could comfort me the way Mecca did. Mecca gave me tremendous love, and then, a few years ago, he left my side and became a star in the heavens. I felt numb for a while, as if I had lost everything. Recently, I brought a dog home to live with me. I wanted to raise another monkey, but nowadays, it's not easy to bring one home. The dog I am raising now is also named Mecca. I believe this new Mecca will be able to give me comfort, just like the previous Mecca did. Many people might scorn me, but I needed to tell someone this story. If you knew how lonely and hard it was for a young, divorced woman living alone in a strange place, I hope you can understand with that in mind.